overpowered, overhyped, overpriced, and out of place. These are all ways the new RSI Meteor has been described by the Star Citizen player base. And from a distance, I can understand why. In this video, I'll be going under the hood and getting a look at the nuts and bolts in an attempt to uncover whether or not what everyone's saying is true, or if the Meteor actually fits nicely into an underutilized niche of ships, one that's been quietly expanding as the game's performance spectrum continues to broaden. A niche for specialists, ships that sacrifice a little bit of versatility in exchange for razor-sharp focus in a single role. Because the Meteor isn't here to replace your favorite medium fighter, it's here to intercept, overwhelm, and disappear. And that's a very different conversation than what might be considered the new meta. In order to do that, we'll be picking the ship apart piece by piece, starting off with a full ship tour, after which we'll dive into a stat analysis and comparison with other ships that possess intersecting characteristics. Then we'll move into some field tests, and then we'll discuss our findings and draw some conclusions. Welcome back everyone to ForgeCore Gaming. I'm your host Phoenix, and this is my honest review of the Meteor from Robert Space Industries. Before we get started, I'd like to ask that you hit that subscribe button if you enjoy in-depth ship reviews and other forms of Star Citizen content. We're officially in our 8th month of publishing videos and are making a push to finish our first year off on a high note. So any likes, comments, and subscribes are always greatly appreciated, but without further ado, let's get into it. Now most of you have already probably seen a full tour of the RSI Meteor, so we'll keep this quick and to the point. Starting off with the exterior and working our way front to back, let's talk about the Meteor's most striking and controversial feature, the guns. Front and center, we have two massive size 5 Leonidas ballistic cannons, perched atop of the Meteor's sleek frame. These are bespoke weapons, meaning you can't swap them out for any other guns currently in the game. That said, there's precedent for CIG adding alternate bespoke options in the future, so while you're locked into it for now, that could change down the line. Just below those cannons, straddling either side of the cockpit canopy, you'll find 4 standard size 3 hardpoints. Out of the box, the Meteor comes with the FL-33s, but I've been experimenting with different loadouts during testing, so as you watch the video, you'll notice a few weapon configurations in action as I put the ship through its paces. Moving along to the side profile, you'll immediately recognize some familiar RSI design language we've seen in recent years. The Meteor borrows most of its styling cues from its predecessor, the Mantis, sharing the same base chassis. However, CIG's ship team didn't just copy and paste. This time, they've reworked the hull and paneling to bring it closer in line with the aesthetic of the RSI Polaris. The result? A more cohesive and distinctly military look that sets the Meteor apart from RSI's civilian ships. It feels purpose-built for combat, sleek, aggressive, and unmistakably part of the RSI fleet. Moving to the rear, we see another key departure from the Mantis design. Instead of housing a quantum interdiction generator, the Meteor's backend has been reworked to carry a missile payload. In its stock configuration, it comes equipped with 4 size 4 missiles and 4 size 2s, but that loadout isn't locked. You can mix and match to suit different roles, swapping for a variety of sizes and quantities. Moving inside, the layout will feel very familiar if you've seen the updated Mantis interior, because it's identical. Now if you're new to this setup, you might be thinking, where's the cargo grid? And you'd be right, there isn't one. Neither the Meteor nor the Mantis offers an official cargo grid. That said, if you're persistent and a little patient, you can finesse a single SCU container through the entryway. It's not ideal, but if you're determined to bring something back with you, it can be done. Starting at the rear on the port side, you'll find a small door leading to the restroom. It's equipped with a toilet but no shower, which honestly bothers me more than it probably should. Just behind the entry point, there's some component storage. Over on the starboard side toward the rear, you've got a compact kitchen setup, so technically you've got what you need for extended trips out into the verse. Moving forward, there's more component storage along the starboard wall. Opposite that though is your bed, perfect for those who prefer bed logging instead of heading back to a station or city. As we make our way up to the cockpit, take note of the fire extinguisher mounted just to the right of the pilot seat. That'll come in handy once engineering gameplay comes online. Now just behind the pilot seat on the port side, there's a hidden button. Press it, and a compartment opens up to reveal a gun rack and an external storage container. The gun rack can handle standard-sized primary weapons or even max-lift tractor beams, though specialty gear will need to be stored elsewhere. On the opposite side, there's a storage for sidearms, though it doesn't seem to accommodate multi-tools, which really probably isn't a big deal. Finally, if you lift the blue panel right next to it, you'll find an external storage bin with a capacity of 450,000 micro-SCU, which isn't much, I know, but CIG accounted for that and added another 450,000 micro-SCU tucked just beneath the bed. It's not game-changing, but it gives you just a little extra breathing room. Sliding into the pilot seat, the cockpit is, again, nearly identical to the updated Mantis, with one major improvement: the canopy. This time, CIG added a tinted front canopy, and honestly, I think it's a huge upgrade over the fully transparent glass we saw on the Mantis. From here, visibility is excellent. You get a wide, uninterrupted view of your surroundings, which is a big advantage for this ship in particular. Now, about the MFDs, this is where things feel a little bit cramped, as the Meteor only gives you 2 multifunction displays, which leaves you somewhat starved for information. For reference, the original Mantis setup had 4, though the latest update trimmed that down as well. And that just about sums up the ship tour, so let's go ahead and move on to the stat overview and comparison. Now, we're going to start this off with the Meteor's biggest selling point, which is also its biggest point of controversy: damage per second. And for this discussion, I put together 3 different weapon configurations inside of Urkel.Games that covers a range of damage outputs as well as projectile velocities. Starting off with our lowest DPS configuration and highest projectile velocity, we installed size 3 CF337 Panther repeaters on all 4 size 3 weapon hardpoints. Doing so put our total DPS output to 4,850. Now this and all configurations will include the bespoke Leonidas ballistic cannons, which account for 2,666 damage per second, so just keep that in mind when we're discussing totals. Up next, we have our NDB-30s, which has the second highest DPS and second fastest projectile velocities, totaling out to 5,518 damage per second. Finally, we have our Ardor repeater loadout, which has the highest DPS output and lowest projectile velocities, and totals out to 6,202 damage per second. These are serious numbers, particularly for a ship as small and as nimble as the Meteor. And if you're wondering why I presented 3 different loadouts, these are just the most commonly used repeaters in the game, so I wanted to show you how your loadout choices would augment your damage output. Now, those high DPS numbers don't come without a cost though, as the Meteor is undershielded at best, if we're looking at it just from a raw stats perspective. In the stock configuration, we have 3,460 shield HP in a bubble configuration, which is 33% less than its Mantis predecessor, and that comes by way of 2 size 1 shield generators. Before we move on to the flight characteristics, let's go ahead though and toss up some ships for comparison. For today, we have a sort of mixed bag of ships, each of which have a slight characteristic intersection with the Meteor, which I'll explain as I introduce them. The first ship we'll be comparing is the Mirai Guardian. Now, I chose the base version because it is going to be the most maneuverable, and it comes with a fully equipped ship interior, so it sits as the closest competitor for a fighter-class ship with long-term living amenities. Up next, we have the Scorpius from Robert Space Industries, and I chose this one due to its interceptor tune and similar loadout if we focus on the Scorpius pilot guns versus the size 3 hardpoints on the Meteor. Finally, we have the F-7A Mark II, which I chose due to it being arguably the most prolific medium fighter in the game. It could be argued that I should have brought out a Saber, but I decided to stick to only 3 ships, and these are the 3 I chose. Now for DPS comparisons, I'm normalizing it across the board and using full attrition or Ardor loadouts when available, just so we can keep this as apples to apples as possible. Shields I kept stock because a number of arguments could be made as to what the best shield configuration for a ship is based on a number of variables beyond most shield HP, which is a ship customization dynamic that I've recently been digging into, so we just kept those stock. And here's the tale of the tape. I think to no one's surprise, the Meteor comes out on top when it comes to DPS at 6,202, with second place going to the F-7A Mark II at 3,132, third place going to the Guardian at 2,714, and the Scorpius in fourth place at 2,096. Now this story does change a bit if we take into consideration the turret gunner seat in the Scorpius. If occupied, the DPS doubles to 4,192, which would move it into the second place slot. When it comes to shields, the story changes a little bit with the Guardian and Scorpius tying for first at 4,740 with a regen rate of 167, and the F-7A and Meteor tying for second or last at 3,460 shield HP with a regen rate of 134. Now, all of these do have bubble shield configuration, so regardless of where your shield takes damage, it all drains from the same HP pool. Now, moving forward with our comparison, let's talk SCM speed. In first place, we have the only other fighter on this list with an Interceptor tune at 230 meters per second unboosted and 590 meters per second boosted, followed up closely by the Meteor at 229 meters per second unboosted and 570 meters per second boosted. In third, we have the F7A Mark II at 220 meters per second unboosted and 479 meters per second boosted, and no surprise, the Guardian comes in at last at 213 meters per second unboosted and 465 meters per second boosted. Now, generally, I don't really pay any focus to nav speeds when I do stat comparisons, but I'm going to highlight the Meteor and Scorpius here at 1,405 meters per second and 1,385 meters per second, respectively, and it's for good reason, but you'll have to wait for the discussion section of this video to see why. When it comes to maneuverability, looking at the pitch yaw roll metrics, I think we probably knew who would win here. In first place, we have the F7A at 50, 40, 143 meters per second respectively, and a weird sort of tie for second place between the Guardian and the Meteor, where we could probably debate it out as to why the Guardian would win, and we could also have the same debate where the Meteor would win, so we're just going to call it a tie. Moving on to hull HP, no argument here, the Guardian wins outright with 69,200 hull HP, though it has been noted that its wings and engine mounts are extremely fragile and break easily, rendering the ship useless. But all 4 of the ships on this list kind of have that problem, so we'll just give it a pass. In last place for hull HP is the F7A Mark II with only 13,051. Now, weirdly, the Meteor, a medium fighter, is actually the heaviest ship out of the bunch, which probably sounds pointless, but I believe will have some weight, no pun intended, once flight models get fully reworked, particularly when we're looking at atmospheric flight. So I figured it was worth mentioning. Now, normally I talk about exact measurements when it comes to dimensions, but all of these are a little oddly shaped with misleading figures in this department. But in summary, the F7 is certainly the smallest, and the Meteor is, weirdly enough, arguably the largest in terms of volumetric footprint, at least if we discard the Scorpius's unfolded wings. And I always consider this when discussing ship sizes in this class, simply because we need to consider whether or not a ship will fit onto a carrier-sized ship, aka a capital. And fortunately, all of these ships do fit into both the Polaris and the Idris, though I found the Meteor and F7 to be the easiest to fly in and out. Finally, to wrap up this comparison, let's talk fuel. When it comes to hydrogen fuel, the Guardian comes in dead last at 9 SCUs of hydrogen, with the Meteor in first place at 28.95 SCUs. But then when we discuss quantum fuel, the script flips, with the Meteor having the smallest tank at 1.15 SCUs of quantum fuel, meaning you'll likely have to refuel for most return trips if you're traveling long distances. Alright, we have done a lot of talking about stuff to this point, but let's find out how the Meteor performs in the field and whether or not it's worth all the hype it's been given. In order to test that, I started off by queuing up an offline pirate swarm, but unfortunately, they would not equip my bespoke weapons, so it wouldn't be a valid test. So instead, I hopped into the PU and started queuing up bounties. Here's what I found. As one would suspect, from a ship with low shield HP, lowest hull HP, a wide visual cross-section, aka pancake, and an interceptor tune, the Meteor is not built for duels, at least not in the traditional dogfighting sense. Right off the rip, I found a couple of things out. First off, the majority of the time you're fighting, you simply will not be employing those size 5 ballistics, which is fine and kind of preferred, because they only give you 240 rounds to begin with, and every trigger pull consumes 2 from each gun. And even if you are laying on the trigger of the Leonidas, your shots probably won't land, and if they are landing, then your 4 size 3 weapons probably aren't. The ballistic characteristics of the bespoke weapon and those of the size 3s are just too different. Now, the story changes quite a bit if your enemy target is large and slow, and you've equipped something like Ardor 3s, which have a projectile velocity of 1,000 meters per second, which is only 160 meters per second away from your Leonidas cannons. So if your aim is to be firing all guns at all times or close to it, then prioritize lower projectile velocities over anything else. Some good alternatives to laser repeaters in this instance would be Deadbolt 3s, Just keep in mind, that does change your restocking fees a bit, and it limits how much time you can take in between trips to the station for refills. I also found that any concerns of this ship being overpowered were, coming as no surprise, unfounded. Because in my experience with it, and I did not rush these tests, enemy NPCs, most of the time, were not being blown out of the sky in a single pass as most people expected they would. The only time I was getting a one-pass kill was when enemies were either presenting their largest cross-section to me for more than a few seconds, or they just flew straight towards me with no deviations in their trajectory. Any other circumstances, and I needed to do at least a few passes before I could finish the job. With that said, I was able to work through MRTs very easily. No real strategy was needed, just go fight whatever there was, which is no surprise. What did surprise me was how quickly things became difficult when I went up to HRTs. And don't get me wrong, each ship in and of itself was not difficult. What was difficult was dealing with multiple ships all at once with my very weak defenses. Now, I toyed around with this, and the best strategy I could land on was probably exactly what you would expect from an interceptor. Fly in fast, drop your load, and get out. Don't flip around until you're outside of their range. Rinse and repeat. Pick off the stragglers every time you flew back, and never voluntarily go into a crowd or they would make you pay. Overall, it wasn't bad. I actually enjoyed using the Meteor quite a bit, but I was certainly a little nervous each time I went into combat once I got to HRTs. Now, I don't often fly interceptors, and I'll admit, I had to adjust away from my usual fighting style, which probably just needs improvement anyways. But one final note on this, it's perfectly fine to have weapons that have wildly different projectile velocities than the Leonidas cannons. If you do take that route though, you should absolutely set your repeaters to a separate firing group and have a button designated to that. Use your repeaters on your way in, and once your pips converge on the target, employ your bespoke ballistics. I actually prefer this method because ballistic damage is absorbed by shields quite a bit, so lobbing ballistics into shields is mostly a waste of ammo. Use your repeaters to take the shields down and expose a weak area, then go in for the kill with those Leonidas cannons. Now, we've gone through the tour, the numbers, the field tests, but let's get down to the questions that matter. Who is the ship for? What's its real purpose? And is it actually worth your money? First off, this is not a daily driver. It's not an all-arounder, and if you're looking for a ship you can take anywhere, do everything with, and dogfight on a whim, the Meteor isn't it. It has a low quantum fuel tank, it breaks easier than you'd like, and it can't haul anything worth mentioning. And that lack of cargo grid locks it into a very narrow use case. That being ship-to-ship combat with maybe the occasional POI hop for FPS missions. But even in ship combat, this isn't for the player who wants classic dogfights. Truth be told, it's just not built for that. It's a little too heavy, it's a little too large, and frankly, too fragile to go toe-to-toe in a prolonged brawl. Now, that doesn't mean it's useless though, far from it in fact. It just means the Meteor demands you play by interceptor rules. You get in fast, you hit hard, and you get out before the fight turns into a slugfest. Now, earlier I teased why nav speed matters, and here's where that comes full circle. Right now, I still use nav mode to disengage and reset, because once your shields go down, and they will, you need to break contact immediately. The regen time isn't long, but you don't have the defenses to survive sticking around. In the future though, with the new flight model and quantum boosting on the horizon, ships like the Meteor become something else entirely. Just imagine, dropping out of a quantum boost at 3,000 meters per second, dumping 6,000 DPS into an enemy before they even know you're there, and blasting away before they can react. That's the kind of predator role this ship is built for, and that's why I think nav speed and soon quantum boost speed is one of the most important metrics for the Meteor's future. Does that make it overpowered? No. In my experience, most of the hype around its raw DPS is just that, it's hype. And even with that 6,200 DPS on paper, this isn't a one-pass kill machine unless your target is big, slow, and flying straight at you. In practice, you'll need multiple passes, and if you mismanage your ammo or expose yourself too long, you're toast. This is not a meta breaker, it's specialist. And that specialist role will only grow more defined as the game's performance spectrum broadens beyond the tight constraints we've had for years. So, should you buy it? At $260, that depends. If you want a ship that forces you to fly differently, that rewards speed and precision over brute force and sustained pressure, then sure, you'll probably have a blast. But if you're after practicality, versatility, or value for money, honestly, I really don't feel like this is it. Right now, I'd have to give it a 5.5 out of 10 for general usefulness, and it's expensive. It straddles too many lines in what it's trying to be, and you can almost always find a better ship for the job you're trying to do. But as a luxury purchase, a want buy for a unique combat experience, I can't deny that it's really fun to use. And when those future flight changes land, this ship could easily evolve into one of the deadliest hit-and-run predators in the verse. Until then, though, the Meteor is still a niche pick. It's a little overhyped, it's a little overpriced, but it's not irrelevant. And that's my verdict. If you made it this far, thank you. I know this was a deep dive, but if you got value out of this breakdown, then I'd ask that you hit that like button and subscribe. It really does help us out as we keep bringing you honest, detailed ship reviews. As always, thank you all very much for watching. Fly safe out there, and I'll see you in the verse. Phoenix out.